Morning, Andrew.
What's going on, Matt?
Not much. Beautiful Sunday here in Wisconsin. Packers play today.
Even more important than that, we're on a podcast right now.
We are. We're recording our very first episode because it's time for fellowship.
This might feel like a casual conversation, and that's probably what everyone's thinking, but we're actually podcasting.
Crazy. Never thought we'd actually start doing this.
Well, we have designed a very cool intro for you guys, so let's hit that intro and then let's kick off the show. So away we go.
Loosen up your ties and roll up your sleeves. It's time for fellowship with Matt and Andrew. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are not necessarily the views and opinions of the Grand Lodge of Wisconsin or any other Grand Lodge or any appended body.
How about that?
There we go. That was pretty awesome.
We had a nice recording done here. Really cool job done by our brother over at Damascus.
Kirk Campagna.
Yeah, he did a great work for us. Awesome sound. We really appreciate him for that.
We do really appreciate it. It's an amazing intro.
So, I guess probably the most convenient place to start this off is let's start by introducing ourselves, our Masonic history, and kind of what we want to do with the show. So why don't you kick us off, Matt?
All right. I'm Matt Conrad. I'm a 5-year Master Mason, currently sitting Senior Warden of my lodge, and I'm a Scottish Rite Mason, York Rite Mason, Shriner, and currently President of the Low 12 Masonic Riders Association Puddlers Chapter, which is the very first chapter that existed in the country.
Awesome. Well, I am Andrew Martins. We were discussing outside, a 3-year Mason, about to be 4-year Mason. Officer in my line, and I am in the York Rite chapter, currently going through my Cryptic Council degrees. Big on Mason enthusiast. I like long walks on the beach, and all that good stuff.
I think it's important to point out at this point that you and I are both very dedicated Blue Lodge Masons. While we love our appendant bodies, we have very much so, especially while we're in the officer line here, committed ourselves 100% to our Blue Lodge.
If you're not doing Blue Lodge right, you're doing it wrong. That's what I've always said. I'm quoted saying that often. So this show is going to be, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think there's a lot of ideas still in the air. Kind of the goal Matt and I have for this show is we want to be like a slice of life masonry. Masonry by Masons who are here and now.
Practical Freemasonry. What really happens in Masonry outside of the lodge room? Obviously, with the way our conversations go, we'll probably delve into some esoterics and other stuff like that, but we really want to talk about current events in Masonry, what's going on in Wisconsin, what's important to know about, and why Freemasonry is important.
Yeah, and I think so in the podcast space for Freemason Podcast, there's a lot of really, really cool, purely educational podcasts. Comes right to mind is Wisconsin's Further Light Podcast is doing an amazing job with providing papers and interviews with very educational, focused content. There's tons of others you see around the country with, Whence Came You comes to mind, The Winding Stairs. There's a lot of that kind of going on. But I really wanted to, with this podcast, kind of focus on, it can be educational, but I really want to get a slice of life of talking with not only one another about our personal experiences with Masonry, but also with brothers who might not necessarily be scholars or have books, but just a brother that you sit with in lodge. Just a guy who has his own story and his own Masonic life and has his own version of Masonry that he lives out day to day as a living Mason. We like to talk about like famous Masons, the Marquis de Lafayette or George Washington, Ben Franklin, and all these, famous authors like Joseph Fort Newton or Wilmshurst or Mackey. But those guys are all living a different version of Masonry from a different time, which is still very interesting and important today. But I want to see how the modern Mason is living out their Masonic lives and their Masonic journey.
I would agree. Casual conversations regarding Masonry. There's a lot to learn in Masonry without taking it to a scholarly level, and just practical day-to-day applications of our tenets and some of the stuff that's implied through our tenets. And we can learn a lot having simple conversations about Masonry. It doesn't all have to be super high level and scholarly.
But also, it may go that way. We don't know. We're wild guys. We're passionate about Masonry. We're both Masons who read. So a lot of that stuff will probably still come through. But I think it's important just to remember that Masonry is not an experience lived within the pages of a book. It's an experience lived in the world, in the lives of Masons, in their interactions with each other and with other people. And that's really hard to supplement in a way that, it has to be something that's a personal experience, something that you learn as you go. It's a personal journey.
Agreed. And it's very important that, we recognize that in order to be a Mason, you don't have to be a high IQ, super intelligent, above board individual, and that, a lot of us are blue collar workers, and that's our background, and we still have a lot to offer in the way of interpreting Freemasonry and the values of Freemasonry and applying them to our life. And I hope we can show that through some of the interview guests we have on in the future.
Another interesting thing, too, so one thing that I think is really cool about Masonry, and maybe we're going on a tangent immediately away from our chosen topic.
Totally expect us to go down rabbit holes.
Is like, if you look at even a slice of our lodge and who's all in it, we have line splicers, plumbers, ex-police officers, lawyers, neuroscientists, white-collar workers who are working in offices, Little Debbie's distributors. And if you think about this, and, veterans, all that stuff, there's an interesting melting pot kind of happening that's like, there's no one version of Masonry because all these different types of people are all breaking bread together and all have their own ways of expressing the teachings of Masonry too. And I think that's going to be the interesting thing about this podcast is seeing, not all the time do we ask Masons, like, what is your Masonry? How do you actually do Masonry? Because a lot of it is kind of done behind the scenes. It's subtle. It's very sneaky. You don't even see when someone's doing a good deed. They just kind of do it. It just kind of goes.
Right. And, if you look at the fraternal organization as a whole, we bring men of different faiths together. So why wouldn't we bring all these men of different backgrounds together? Ultimately, at the end of the day, you got to be a good man with a well-grounded faith. So they're going to come from all sorts of different backgrounds and career paths and choices in life. And the lodge reflects that. And you get to have this unique experience of interacting with all these different people and learning about their careers and their lives and everything else that maybe you wouldn't have had the chance to interact with those kind of people if you weren't part of the fraternity.
And not to use a Masonic pun or cliche, I want to bring those types of people's stories to light through this podcast, that they can be shared and experienced by brothers around the state. A lot of the focus of this podcast for me, I want to be starting focus small and focusing on Wisconsin's Masons and Wisconsin Masonry. But I would say that those types of conversations have a greater impact and they interest people outside of the state too. But I really want to put the emphasis and the highlighting on what is happening here and now on the local level within our state, because we're doing so much good work in Wisconsin. And through that, we're able to share this Masonic experience that people around the world could find interest in, because it feels like you're visiting a lodge instead of visiting like a high-level conversation. You're just listening to brothers talk about brother stuff, which is honestly what we get we're mostly all professionals in, is just brothers talking about brother things.
Well, and hence the name. It's time for fellowship.
Oh, yeah.
The best work happens outside of the lodge room typically, and that's where you really get to know your brothers. And fellowship's important, which is why we chose this name for the podcast is because we want to bring other brothers in here and have fellowship with them and have those kind of conversations that happen in those situations. And Andrew and I have those kind of conversations all the time, so that's why we thought it would be a good idea to pair up on this. We're also going to be asking you guys for your help at some point here. We're going to establish an email for the podcast that you will be able to email questions in, or if you have somebody you think it would be a good idea for us to interview. We're going to promote local Wisconsin events, so once we announce that email address, please feel free to email us your events that are going around in the state, and we will plug and promote your events for you on the show.
Yeah, and also, like, at the same time, I want to plug not only Masonic events, I want to plug a little bit of Masonic news. And I know that every Mason in Wisconsin reads every single article in their Masonic journal, just like I do. We all read the whole thing front to back. I'm 100% sure we all read it. But I really want to start pulling some of those cool things we're doing in the state, at least one or two per episode, out of that journal and bring it to light so that we can share the good works that brothers are doing around the state with all the brothers who maybe aren't newspaper readers like... I mean, probably me would be a good example of someone who doesn't really get into reading newspapers as much. But it's a good excuse for me to A, read the journal more, B, share the good works. And honestly, I feel like that's like a win-win for everyone. So along with sharing that kind of information, we might even have questions for you guys that we want to ask. And, you know, we'd love if we ask those questions that we have you guys email in. And by the next episode, we'll have an email set up, a structure, to make sure that you guys are able to email in your responses, your questions, or anything you'd like us to talk about, because honestly, we're all in this together. We're a family here at Time for Fellowship. It's time for fellowship.
It is time for fellowship. And we should definitely celebrate all of Masonry's joys in Wisconsin and all the good works that all the lodges out there are doing. There's no reason to keep what your lodge is doing secret. We all want to share in each other's successes. We all want to help each other through each other's hardships. That's what we're here for. That's why this is a brotherhood, and we're going to bring that to you in podcast form.
So buckle up, buttercups. It's coming in hot. Coming in ready. It's time for fellowship.
It is time for fellowship.
Well, let's see here. We're a couple minutes in. Is there anything else we want to talk about, or we want to wrap this up so we can start to plan for our next episode where we go into the meats and potatoes?
I think we should wrap this one up and call it a good introduction episode. I hope you guys all got a beginning of an idea of who we are and what our goals are with this, and we'll talk to you in the next episode.
Sounds good, guys. And just as you remember, we are going to be available on every single wherever you listen to your podcast. Make sure to like and follow. There's a lot more good stuff coming. Remember, we're new podcasters, so if we sound like two guys talking on microphones, that's because that's exactly what we are.
That is exactly what
two brothers talking on microphones in the back room of a lodge, working it all out. So thank you for tuning in for our first episode, and we will see you next time.
And thank you for coming on this journey with us.